Well, I think we have to realize that there are low barriers to entry for cyber war capability. That you don't have to be a huge country, you don't have to have an enormous amount of talented people or money. Small countries have been able to do this. There are now, I think, 26 countries that have military cyber commands. There are countries that you might not think would be in this sort of business. I've been to the headquarters of the Brazilian Army Cyber Command, the Norwegian Army Cyber Command. They're popping up all over the world. And they're not doing it entirely for defensive purposes. They're also all looking at whether or not they could use cyber offensive weapons. So the concept of cyber war may seem strange, it may seem like science fiction, it may seem like hype, but there are hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by governments around the world to create cyber offensive units. And therefore I think we need to get over the question of is this real? It's real. And nation states are building offensive capability. What about non-nation states? So far, we've seen non-nation states stealing money, stealing information, doing propaganda, doing covert communications, doing recruitment. We haven't seen non-nation state actors, terrorist groups, yet doing things that really fall in the category of cyber war. I define cyber war as destruction, damage, or disruption on a significant scale. Haven't seen that yet by terrorist groups. But we do know that the knowledge about how to do this is gradually drifting south from a handful of sophisticated governments and a handful of units in those states to many, many governments, many, many states. And more we see the cyber criminals in particular using very sophisticated techniques. So is it possible that a well-funded terrorist group could conduct a cyber war? It could, if it were able to use the money that it has to hire sophisticated cyber hackers. And that's not inconceivable. Some of these people are definitely for hire, and you could hire them to do espionage, or you could hire them to do destruction. I think the first question that utilities have to get over is this real? It is. The second question utilities have to get over is, how are we going to pay for this? If they find that it's difficult to pay for it within existing budget structures, then they need to go to the regulators and change the rates. No one wants them to take it out of Hive. No one wants to have it taken out of profits. No one wants it to be taken out of modernization. But it is going to cost money. And if utilities don't have that money programmed, they need to program it over the next 3 to 5 years. And if they need proof for their state regulators and other rate regulators to approve increases, I'm sure there are people in the federal government who can come and help them convince the rate regulators that this is a real threat and they need to do something about it. Then they need to think, well, okay, what do I do about it? And the key things there are, for me at least, a recognition that the attacker is going to get in. That whatever you do, he'll figure out a way to get in. And this has been demonstrated over and over again with government agencies, with banks, with people who really know what they're doing and spend a lot of money. They're unable to keep the attackers out. So with that recognition in mind, I would do a couple of things. One, I would segment networks to the maximum extent possible so that people really cannot jump from the public-facing web page or the administrative network into the control network. Secondly, I would try to segment the grid controls so that if one section were taken down, it wouldn't spread. I know we're already doing that for power surges. We need to do it on the controls plane as well. And then finally, I would look to buying things to have in warehouses, things that are right now not in warehouses, and that includes generators. Generators so far have been built for just-in-time delivery. They've been built on order. Companies like General Electric don't have extra warehouses, extra generators sitting around in warehouses, and neither do electric companies. So whether it's transformers, generators, the actual high-tension wires, I would have excess capacity because what's going to happen in the cyber war is not that someone's going to come in and flip the switch and turn things off. They're going to destroy hardware or cause hardware to destroy itself. We know that that's possible. There have been lots of experiments to prove that that's possible. People need to get over the belief that, no, you can't do that. You can. Well, every organization, including utilities, need to worry about two things in addition to external attacks. One is supply chain, and the other is the insider threat. And supply chain means software as well as hardware. Have you had a third party that specializes in analyzing software check the software that you're buying? We know that there have been, even in very popular, widespread SCADA systems, there have been backdoors inserted, not maliciously, and not with the company's knowledge, but by employees of the software vendors, putting it in for their own ease of use for later remote access. There could be any number of things in software. Software inherently has errors in it, high volume of errors. You need to have a third-party piece of software checking that. So software as well as hardware supply chain needs to be tested before it goes live. Secondly, we all have insider threats. The FBI, the CIA, the State Department, everybody has had an insider. And the most recent example is Snowden, who was an insider threat inside NSA. He was a contractor, but nonetheless, he was on the NSA network. So he was an insider within NSA, the most secret organization in the United States. It's very difficult to look at your workforce and say, I'm going to predict who the insider is going to be. If you look at the people that have been caught as spies in CIA and FBI and others, no one would have guessed that it would have been the people who were caught. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a matter of having a good HR department run psychological testing or profiling. You need to have systems in place to catch unusual behavior. Well, the Internet of Things is already here. With all of these things like the cloud and the Internet of Things, we've always had them. We just now have names for them, and people pretend they're new and different. So we already have things that are talking to each other over the net. Now, if your Coke machine runs low, it phones Coke and sends out a truck. If your elevator is having a little difficulty with its cable or with its motor, it calls the repairman. And the same is true of your photocopier in large enterprises. They're all on the network. They're all talking to each other. And they're all monitored remotely. This is good. It means that repairs occur on time or just before they're needed. That means we don't run out of supplies for things. But it also means that there's an avenue of attack. And we saw in the case of the Target store attack, there wasn't Target's network per se that had the problem. It was a vendor that was connected through the Target firewall to their chillers, their food chillers. And so there we had the food chillers in Target as part of the Internet of Things, phoning home and saying how they were. And that opened up a hole. Nobody attacked the food chillers, but they came through that hole in the firewall that was made for the food chillers and then jumped from it to the point of sale machines in the stores. That's an example that we can all learn from. if you're going to have an Internet of Things and you're going to allow machines to talk to each other, to say how they are and when they need help, then they really need to be segmented. They need to be on networks that are not critical, are not connected to critical functions, and are air-gapped. And we need to be constantly monitoring to make sure that nobody screws up and connects the critical system network to the non-critical system network. We want to make sure that that air gap is never jumped. So it's not a matter of just putting it in and saying, I have an air gap. You have to keep monitoring the air gap.